Right, so we were talking about shirk, or associating partnership with God. Now, one of the reasons why associating partnership with God comes out is in relation to our topic of yaqeen, or attaining yaqeen in the modern world. This need to feel close to God or feel the presence of God is always there. Remember the three fundamental questions about theology or God. Does God exist? Is God one? How do I relate to God? So that third question is also a reason why shirk comes out. And let me give you an analogical explanation first, in the way that you can relate to sun in three different ways. We're talking about the sun in the sky, right? Then I'm going to then use that, once we present that, use it to understand three ways of relating to God. Okay, so here's our sun in the sky. So you can get close to the sun in three ways. The first one is you can jump on a spaceship and travel to the sun. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do. It takes a lot of energy. Not everyone can do it. You have to be an astronaut. You have to work in NASA and be in the United States, probably. Or China these days. So that's not accessible to a lot of people. And also, if you get there, you're going to burn. The second way of relating to the sun is you can imagine that sun comes to you. You know, that's one possibility. And so a spark of the sun, a kind of a miniature sun comes in a human being. So you let the sun come down to you. And if that was to happen, that would, again, destroy you. And it's also not possible, right? But there's a third way of relating to the sun, and that is to focus on sun's light. So if you focus on sun's light, what you realize is that the sun's light actually reaches you. And that in that light, there's a lot of knowledge about the sun. You can work out the temperature. You can even work out the composition of the sun. Like how many elements does the sun have? Carbon, oxygen, and other elements, and to what percent. They actually do this now. They can take the spectrum of light of each star in the sky. They can work out even the age of that sun by the composition of the elements inside. So you can get a lot of knowledge out of just the light. And that is more real. You don't have to travel, and you don't have to imagine that sun is coming to you. You just have to realize that, hey, the sun is there, it's stroking my skin, I can feel the heat, I can feel it's affecting me in a nice way. So that's actually, these are the three ways human beings understood to relate to God. You know, some religions have this idea of traveling to the divine. And sometimes one lifetime is not possible. There has to be multiple lifetimes. You have to come back to life again, try again, and then eventually you can get to reach that enlightenment or nirvana. Then there's some religions imagine that God has come down to human level. But Islam focuses on the third option, which is focusing on names and attributes of God. And if you focus on names and attributes, it's safer because it doesn't lead to shirk. And it also leads to a better understanding of God. And also, just like, when you, it's a bit like this, you walk around in the sun, and you don't even realize, you're not even thinking there is the sun, and the sun's rays are hitting you most of the time. But when you do, it gives you a bit of a different relationship with the sun. So in a similar way, we can when you focus on God's names and attributes, and actually then realize or have mindfulness that you can recognize these names and attributes in the natural world, then you can understand, one, it increases your certainty, yaqeen, it increases your belief, and then we understand God in a better way. Like, for example, when you see an alligator looking after its young, you see the compassion of God manifesting in that. When you see a beautiful flower, you see beauty or God's name Jalil manifesting in that. When you see a pounding wave hitting the shores, you see that Aziz, Hakim or Jabbar names manifesting. So that's why the Quran, whenever it's talking about natural world, it mentions the names of God. So if I go back to the slides, remember that slides that God is, so it is He who is God in the heavens and God on earth, for He is Hakim and Alim. The verse finishes with two names of God. Why are those two names mentioned? Hakim and Alim. Because Hakim means like hikmah or wisdom, and wisdom points to purpose. And also wisdom usually comes out not from apparent things, but from the intentions behind what things happen, why things happen. So when you look at the world, natural world, and you don't see God, you see His wisdom comes out more, His purpose comes out more. And Alim refers to the fact that, why is Alim mentioned? So even though God is not visible, He still knows everything in the heavens and the earth. Right? So there are things that veil God's presence, but then those veils do not prevent God knowing everything. So it's so appropriate. And there are actually numerous verses in the Quran finish with names, certain names of God. This is no accident, brothers and sisters. You know, if you believe in Quran as God's word, you would then believe that nothing is accidental. You know, everything has a very particular purpose. So what the main reason for that is, God wants us to see those names operate in the content of those verses. He wants us to reflect and on what we see around us, and then relate those names to those incidents. Like, for example, there's a verse in the Quran that says, it is it is Allah who sends down rain from the sky. And then the verse finishes, for He is Latif and Khabir. Like, Latif means subtle, Khabir means aware. Now, let's reflect on that. Rain comes from the sky. Who needs the rain? Plants, animals, we do. So only the one who is aware of your needs can deliver the rain. So it's so appropriate, isn't it, that Khabir name instead of Alim is mentioned in that verse. And also Latif. Why is Latif mentioned? Like, Latif means subtlety, refinement, that Allah does things in a subtle way, in a refined way. It doesn't do it in a coarse, vulgar way. How does the rain fall? Imagine rain coming down with a bucket full, like a bucket. You have places to hide. And, if a human being was to fall from the sky, by the time you hit the ground, your body's moving 200 kilometers an hour. Well, that's why it just gets splattered on the... why doesn't raindrops become like bullets? They should be. So it doesn't. There's some science behind it, chemistry, physics behind it, but there's more, what's behind it is subtlety. Subtlety of knowing that if this thing comes down very hard, it's going to damage plants, it's going to damage human beings. So it's done very in a subtle way. So, yeah, in a gentle way. So it's so beautiful, isn't it? Like when you really reflect on that, and when you reflect on it like that, you grow to appreciate the Creator even more, don't you? And this is what we mean by focusing on names and attributes. It allows you to understand, grow in knowledge of the Creator, but also you gain certainty because you can see a divine signature on everything. Yes, brother.
Isn't it very unique in religion of Islam that human beings can relate to God through these names? Because I haven't actually seen in other religions the names. Like whenever you want to relate in some certain issues to God, there are certain names that you can relate to, and Allah loves when you mention, for example, when you ask for forgiveness, you just actually mention that you are the most forgiver or the most forgiven God. So Allah loves when you mention the names which you ask something on that relation. Isn't it very unique in that?
Yeah. And of course, it's unique. Other religions also have multiple names for divine or God, but it's only a handful. Only in Islam, there's 99 names, even more than that. Like if you really count strictly in Quran and Hadith. When I was a kid, I used to say, "Why does God have so many names?" I guess when you're a kid, you don't fully grasp that, but now I do. You know, it's beautiful, and also notice that the Quran says Asma al-Husna, beautiful names. Like God is attributing beauty to Himself and His names. This is very important as well. And as the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, God is beautiful, He loves beauty. So we should seek, what that means is that then we should seek beauty in the things that we do. We need to beautify ourselves, not just physically, but in our character, in our deportment, in the way that we behave. You know, I find this amazing, especially in Hollywood movies where you have an actor who's beautiful in one movie and in another movie they look ugly because they go into the character. Same person, but maybe they play the evil character and they look ugly and repulsive. It's exactly the same person. So you can really beautify yourself by adorning yourself with attributes that are beautiful as well. Like, isn't it, for example, when you become knowledgeable, like attending these classes, in a way you are becoming alim, a knowledgeable person. When you do acts of charity, kindness, show generosity, you become, we can say rahim, you're merciful, and you can give kind, things like that. And I'll talk about next week. This is very important on the way that we relate to Allah and also understand Creator.
I think it's very easy to have this conversation with people who are Muslim and already believe. But if you're in a situation where you're speaking to people about Islam and you're telling them about the attributes of God and how they're beautiful, where their view is already that Islam is harmful for the world, and how do you believe in God when there's famine, when there's war? How do you present yourself in a way that is both diplomatic but also reflects Islam by highlighting the names and attributes as you want to?
I guess you don't. If a person has problem with suffering or infliction or negative image of Islam, you don't start with names or attributes. Yeah. You probably start with other things. I would say you first have to start with your humanity, the humanity of a Muslim. Like in my experience, whenever I met with non-Muslims, I realized that they were watching me more than how I was behaving, more than what I was saying. Now, I did a lot of talks, for example, after 9/11 in churches and in many places. Once this lady came to me, the audience was really hostile. They were really offensive, like the way they were asking questions, and they were saying, "Why is Islam? Why are Muslims so violent people?" and things like that. Why is Islam say this, say that? And I gave calm answers and reasonable answers. And during the break afterwards, a lady came to me. I was really impressed by the way you handled yourself. And and if I asked her, "What do you remember of the things I said?" she probably won't remember anything, but she'll remember my behavior. And that was enough to change her image of Muslims. Because, don't forget, people are experiencing Muslims in different ways, and one of them is through media. And when they hear all these bad things, honestly, I really believe that. Imagine, like 20 years, you're bombarded almost every day. Muslims are this, Muslims are that. Sometimes I open news, in a half an hour news slot, there are 4 stories about Muslims. One is in Indonesia, one is in Sydney. They're all negative. And imagine you're bombarded with that every day. You're going to have a negative perception of Muslims. But nothing beats personal experience. The only one meeting, positive personal experience with a person can change all of that. So it's very powerful. So I would start with that. As a Muslim, that's what I did all the time. And I would recommend that. And then you get into discussions and other matters of theology, Does that? I guess I'm going to have a whole class about suffering, all those. If there is a God and the God is merciful, why is there suffering on earth? That's a very important question posed to all religions, not just Islam, and that needs to be answered properly. And I'm going to cover an entire evening, maybe the last lecture. So you have to come to until the last lecture. Yes, Evie.
When we talk about attributes of God, they can also be attributes of mankind and humans. So how can a human, he said Rahim, and someone can be kind, and that's an attribute of God. How does that affect Tawheed?
I'm going to answer that question next week. That's an important question. Like, how do we know we're not projecting ourselves onto God? Yeah, it's an important question.
Just to say, not just non-Muslims, even Muslims come to a stage where they question why suffering. It's part of what if there's a God and He's so merciful, why am I suffering, or why did this happen? So
there's multiple angles to that, and we're going to cover all of them, inshallah. Like there's the individual suffering, there's suffering inflicted to animals, there's humans to humans, or even like God doing things that we may perceive to be causing, infliction. So we're going to natural disasters, for example. So we're going to cover all of that. All right. Now, one of the things is when we say God is the one who creates everything, He's governing the entire universe, how does God do that? How does one create everything so easily? Especially in the Quran, when Quran says, "To Him is due the primal origin of the heavens and the earth. When He decrees a matter, He says to it, be, and it is." So I'm going to explain this in a number of ways, and this will be, once again, I'm going to resort to analogies. They are sometimes a best way to explain things. Okay, so the first one is light in mirrors analogy. So if you imagine a room full of mirrors on all the walls, there are thousands of mirrors, and you only have one candle in the middle of the room. By virtue of light being or light travels in omnidirectionally, like it travels in all directions at the same time. By virtue of that, the image of that light or candle will appear in every mirror. And one image appearing in one mirror does not prevent other image to appear in another mirror. So in a way, God's power is omnidirectional like this. It permeates the entire universe equally without difficulty. The second one is tree analogy. Like growing a fruit, let's say I gave apple example, growing a single apple is as easy as growing thousands of apples on a single tree. And how is that possible? And that's possible because of the branch structure. There's a skeleton or a backbone that links everything to a single source. And this is perhaps the way the universe is structured. I'll give you two evidence for that. One religious, one scientific. The religious evidence is in the Quran, when the Prophet goes into sky, the ascension. The Quran talks about Sidratul Muntaha, this tree that exists in the outermost levels of existence. What I think that is I don't think, you had a tree there, you go all the way to the heavens and you see a tree like on earth. It's not like a tree on earth. The Prophet was shown, or he saw, the structuring of the universe, or that single source that everything was going and how it was branching out. The thing is, we don't see those branches, we just see the fruits, the moon and the stars, galaxies and so on. But the scientific explanation is that now, like cosmologists say that the universe has scaffolding, and there's something called dark matter. That's something they can't see. They can detect its effect, but they cannot see it. And they say that the universe has like filaments, like structure. Everything's connected. See, this shows what this means is that if everything's connected, then creation of a star on one end of the universe is as easy as creating another star in the other end, just like on a tree. I'm explaining it in this way because not that, for God, there's no such thing as difficulty, but it just brings us closer to our understanding when we explain it this way. Because God is the one who created the universe, set these structures in place, and shows us samples of what He does. Like a tree is a beautiful example of that. Another ship analogy, like by virtue of, there's a boat image there and there's an ocean liner. The ocean liner is massive. The boat is very small, but it takes the same amount of energy for a captain to steer both of them at the same time. The reason why ocean liner can move because it's got the systems in place, like there's mechanics or machinery that are all connected to the rudder and the motors, and there's energy sources there, and a whole system in place. So it's as easy as moving an ocean liner is as easy as moving a boat. So basically, to God, everything is easy, like a domino, for example, effect. When you have all these dominoes, all you have to do is just touch one end, and then everything will just go if they are linked. Like a domino doesn't cause another domino to fall. That single push is the cause of everything. That's why we sometimes say for God, musabbabul asbab. Like He's the cause behind all causes. That's a term that's used. Okay, we had our break, so I'm going to move. Now, obviously, I don't have time to probably discuss angels today. I was a bit over-ambitious. But I'm going to talk about another important topic related to unity of God. And that is who created God question. And this was asked to me by a philosopher. You know, we had some interaction with a philosopher from Charleston University, and his name was, I won't mention his name, he's from Australia. And now, most philosophers are atheists, unfortunately, because they question everything. I guess they're very smart people, and if they don't get full answers, they don't accept it. So this philosopher was also an atheist. And we had lunch one day. I wasn't, trying to convert him or anything, but naturally, I'm Islamic studies sort of a lecturer and expert. Then the discussion inevitably comes down to religion, God, and so on. And he said to me respectfully that he was an atheist, and I said to him, "Why don't you believe?" And he said that he doesn't believe because if there's a creator, who created God? That question bugged him a lot, and in his mind, that he couldn't solve that, so he can't believe if he can't solve it. By the way, he was really impressed by Muslims. Again, not because of what Muslims were saying. He found Muslims very sincere people. Like, sincerity of Muslims were very impressive to him. And maybe that's what Muslims should do, that we should focus on this, ikhlas. We talked about ikhlas today. Ikhlas means sincerity. And as you know, actions are judged according to intentions, very important in Islam. Your intention has to be pure. It shouldn't be selfish. Like, we got to talk more about that. The sincerity and authenticity in your intentions, your dealings with other people, it's something that's missing in the world. And people see the value of it when they see it. Yes?
I was just thinking, on the topic of sincerity and wanting to find truth. Often people that are sincere in their quest find the truth, because is there a concept where people that are just interested for the sake of proving that they're most intelligent, they can't accept the fact that as a human being we're limited, say we can't imagine the infinity of God. So that person who's just learning for the sake of being the smartest person can't sit down and picture the infinity of God, so then they're just never going to believe. To know God, I think we have to consider our own the limitations of human being as well.
Okay, I guess the answer to your question is that faith is never a rational thing only. That's why I call this subject faith and reason. You could also say reason and heart. And heart kind of represents the emotional side, or more the intuitive side to our being. Reason is the more intellectual side. We never do things on intellect alone. There's always feelings associated with it. Even when you're buying clothes or something, you rationally think about, okay, how much is this? Can I afford it? What's its functions? Does it do everything I want? But also you say, do I like it, right? Even when you marry somebody, you can reason all your way through it, but you have to like the person that you marry at the end of the day. So faith is a bit like that, there is definitely reason involved, your reason has to be satisfied, but it's not just the reason alone. Your intuition, your feelings have to be satisfied as well.
And that's why I feel sometimes when I'm talking to non-Muslims, if they're if they're genuinely interested in finding the truth, there's a different discussion, whereas some people sometimes just arguing to, get to a point. And with someone who's arguing to get to a point just on pure intellect, in the end, you never end up winning because I've got to a discussion with someone for a long time, and in the end, he was like, "No, yeah, it makes sense that there should be a creator." But in the end, he was like, "But I don't know why I should worship or have anything to do with God." And then, that, it's hard to then explain all of that. I feel like if you're just going through it from an intellectual exercise, you won't get to know God.
I would say yes and no. Yes, sometimes you get nowhere in discussions. If they become polemical debative, definitely there's no listening there. The person's just thinking about the next question they need to answer. But believe me, no matter what people say, when you say something and it's done in a nice way and it makes sense, it leaves an impression in their mind. Like, they're not going to admit it straight away, but they'll go away and think about it. It will bother them at night. Who was there who couldn't sleep? And when you really ask people how did they, let's say, had a massive transformation in their beliefs, they always did it in a particular way. Like it was always a progression rather than an all of a sudden realization. Even Imam Ghazali, when he talks about, I think your question, like who are people has salvation, who are people saved, especially if they don't know about, if they haven't received the message. He categorizes people into three main categories. He says, well, if you heard the message, you're accountable. And then you heard the message, but in a very negative way, you're not accountable. Just like people just know, these Muslims are all terrorists. Like they're hearing about Islam and Muslim, but in a very negative way. According to Imam Ghazali, they are not accountable. And then there are people who've never heard about it. They're not accountable either. But he puts a fourth category, and he says the seekers, where they are, looking for it, they are examining, thinking about it, they're on a journey, but they haven't made up their mind yet. What happens to them? And to him, they're also saved because they're on the journey. God knows best, of course. And it was interesting that when I was talking to this philosopher, both of these topics came at once. Like he was asking me a rational question, but we also talked about sincerity. It just goes to show, everyone has those two aspects. So if you try to satisfy someone's reason alone, it's not going to work. If you satisfy someone's emotion or heart only, it's not going to work. Like when you see the Prophet, peace be upon him, he's always done both. Like, let's say this young man came to him and they said, "Oh Prophet, can you give me permission to have sexual relations, without getting married? I can't help myself." And so he first gives him a rational answer. He says, "Okay, come sit here." He says, "Okay, when you go and have relations with women," no, he said, "Would you like any strange man to come and have relations with your mother, sister, in an illegitimate way?" He says, "No." Anyone who mentions says no. He says, "What about when you want to have relations with them? Aren't they mothers, sisters, aunties of other people? So how are you going to do that to someone else?" So, okay. And then he put his hand on his chest and made dua for him. And that was the spiritual side or the heart side. And it worked, Yeah. Okay, so how do you answer this question? If God created the universe, who created God? Now, this is what we call eternity problem. The thing is, you can't avoid to have this eternity problem. Something has to be eternal. If it's not God, then universe has to be eternal, because if the universe doesn't have a creator, then the universe has to be always there. Because why should universe exist at all? Out of nothing. When there's nothing, how can something come out of nothing? So either God is eternal or universe is eternal. It means that either God has a beginning or universe has a beginning. Since universe has a beginning, definitely, it must be that. Sorry, I take that back. Let me explain that again. So either God is eternal or universe is eternal. And for something to be eternal, it must not have a beginning. So since universe definitely has a beginning, as we discussed last week, then universe cannot be eternal. Therefore, by default, God must be eternal. Or whatever created caused the universe, which we call that being God, that must be eternal. You can't avoid this. And these days, people are saying, what about multiverse? We can explain the existence of a Big Bang because there are many universes. We just happen to be in the one that is the one that had the Big Bang and the most suitable for life. There's probably countless universes that are within a multiverse. So what are they doing with that? They're really transferring the eternity problem to the multiverse, because you have to then believe the entire multiverse must have been there all the time for eternity. Because like Big Bangs are coming and going and coming and going, but that multiverse stays there for eternity. You haven't solved anything. You just transferred the problem eternity to multiverse. So, and that's a clever way of dodging the question, because you can't prove multiverse exists. Anyway, how do you know multiverse exists? Then so the question leaves hanging. So, as I said, we definitely know universe has a beginning. It cannot be eternal. Therefore, there must be another being that's eternal that brings about the universe. The thing with this is, with this question, who created God? Like if God is an explanation or a reasonable explanation of the universe, and even you can claim to be the best explanation of the universe's existence, you don't have to explain the explanation. Do you? No, you don't always have to explain the explanation. Like, for example, if I go to the moon and I see a spaceship on the moon, and probably the best and it doesn't look like anything like on Earth, what's the explanation of that? Someone was there, some alien spaceship, the Transformers. Did you see that episode of Transformers? There was a spaceship on the moon. You go there and there's this machine, spaceship. Someone must have brought this. An intelligent being is crashed here, or they left this spaceship. That's the only best explanation. It's not the only explanation. You can say, the moon rocks evolved, this, that, and billions of years passed, and then you get this spaceship. It's an explanation, but it's not the best explanation. The most reasonable and the best explanation would be that some alien beings left the spaceship there. Now, if that explains the spaceship, you don't have to explain where did the alien beings came from. That's a separate question. So what we need to do, and this is what I encourage you, what explains the universe the best? What is the best explanation for the existence of the universe? Is it by chance, or is it by a creator? If your conclusion to that is, as we argued in the last week, if the best explanation is that creator created it, then you don't have to explain where creator comes from. You don't know that question. But nevertheless, I think we need to still appreciate that. We can still appreciate it by, let me give you a few examples of how we can answer this question in a different way. So imagine everything really ties down to, you don't have to explain the explanation part. Like, for example, here's a train. What pulls the car right at the back? The car in front, right? What pulls that car? The one in front. What pulls that? And you come all the way to the locomotive here. If I ask you what pulls the locomotive, that's an absurd question, isn't it? It has its own power. It generates its own power. And so that's where you stop. You don't have to go further than that. And here's another example. And here's a number. What's that number equal to? Sorry? 0. Okay, how about I add another 100 zeros to that? What? Doesn't change the value. Because 0 is 0, no matter 0, 10 to the power of infinity, still 0. How about that? What about this number? All I did to this number was add a 1 in front, and it's got exactly the same zeros. Now all of a sudden it becomes massive, doesn't it? See, this is what is important. Everything that's created is like 0. I mean, from a creative perspective, it means like it's not a creator; it's created, so it doesn't have any creative power. Without a creator, creation means nothing. You need that creative source. And that cannot be same as, like zeros cannot be same as, 1 is not same as zeros. So the creator cannot be same as the created. It comes back to what I said earlier, art cannot be the same as artist. So what this means is that when you say who created God, and let's say you say, there's another big higher being that created that God. Well, who created that? Someone else. Who created that? Another God. And ad infinitum, as they say, like that goes infinitely. Like you're adding 0, 0, zeros. Unless you stop and say, there is a creator who's not created. Like even Aristotle recognized this 2,000 years ago. He said, unmovable mover. He said, if everything that moves is caused by another motion, because ultimately you need a point in which there is an origination of movement, but that doesn't move itself. And he called it unmovable mover. So another thing that scholars called about God, wajib al-wujud. Like his existence is necessary to explain everything. Because without God, without a creator, just everything just hangs in a worthlessness. Yeah. So I guess we don't know. We don't have to explain God's what we call self-subsistence, but we can give that attribute to God, because there's no other way. And this brings me to very quickly. I'll just mention the attributes of God. Like all Muslims have to know this by heart. Like this is the concept of God in Islam. That God exists. There are two sets of attributes. One is called attributes of transcendence, that only God has this, that God has existence, but his existence is real, doesn't depend on anything. He's self-subsistent, qiyam bi nafsih, that is, his existence is not fueled or caused by anything. Oneness or wahdaniyah, that he's the only one that has true oneness. Beginningless, endlessness, that is, he's eternal in both sense, that doesn't have a beginning or an end. And he's unlike any of his creation. These are the 6 essential attributes of God. And again, you can memorize this. I really strongly recommend you to think about that. And then there are 8 what we call personal or affirmative attributes of God. These are the ones that are more like we can relate to a bit more better, because we've got these in a limited way. I'll explain this, why this is significant next week. Like life, so we have life, so God is living, God is knowing, he has knowledge, infinite knowledge. All of this is infinite, and in a way it goes with, is unlike any of his creation. Like God knows, unlike, he doesn't need to be educated. His life is not produced by, like he's not begotten, things like that. So God has power, He's hearing, seeing, and God speaks, and God makes things exist. So all of these are based in Quran. They're all based on what Quran says, that God's attributes. And all of the names of God emanate from these attributes as well. And we'll sort of kind of leave there, but I just want to conclude with another slide. This one. Because we started with kind of relating that certainty with feeling the presence of God. But now that we've covered the topic of unity of God, how they are related in this way. Like, appreciating God's unity leads to feeling God's presence, and feeling God's presence more leads you to deepen in your appreciation of God's unity. So they are interdependent. And a combination of those what produces yaqeen. And notice that you might even say that appreciating God's unity is your reason. Feeling God's presence is your heart. So the combination of the two is what produces yaqeen or certainty. Yeah. So maybe that's why, again, as I said last week, certainty is linked to wisdom. And so these are the effects of many attributes that makes us human being, or many parts of what makes us human being. So this naturally leads us to the next topic, which is what? Human nature and purpose of life. I'm going to move the topic of angels to fourth week when we talk about Quran and Revelation. I guess that's a sort of a bit more natural place.